I can hear you. Okay.
Is it all online or is there a live audience?
There is a live audience. Say that again. We're online and you're counting me down? There's a live studio audience, just to let you know. Thomas?
Yes.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first leg of the 3 days of In Conversation, and the umbrella being intersectionality. And our first conversation for today will be power of language. And I think it's not necessarily, are we going to cover arts, but just in general in the power of language. And I just wanted to read to you the rules of engagement within the space. When we put this together, we felt, as the board and also Kampanaga, that it would be necessary to just have a safe space where we can have a conversation. And so collectively, we came up with the rules of engagement for this space over the next 3 days. And just to reiterate that this is a conversation, and it's not necessarily something that it's like a formal academic discussion, but I think everybody is okay to take whatever stance they take. If you need to be more relaxed about answers, you're welcome, and also audience, please feel welcome and at ease that you are somehow part of the conversation and that you can join a little bit later. Well, without further ado, I will read to you the rules of engagement. We are all responsible for this space, so we are all responsible to hold the space together as these conversations happen. And we welcome multiple viewpoints, including to all three of you as well. Speak for yourself, don't speak for others. Practice recognizing your privileges in the space and in context. Appreciate the different experiences and abilities of others. Take responsibility for the power of your language when asking questions or when we are in discussion together. Be open to dialogue. Take risks. Learn, lean into the discomfort, Step back, share speaking time. Listen actively before thinking about how to respond. Challenge with care. Respect confidential information when sharing with others. Try to be clear as you can. Respect your boundaries and those of others. Acknowledge the source of your thoughts. Do not appropriate, appreciate. Without any further ado, do you guys want me to, you start, or is anybody willing to just start? They will introduce themselves. We think, or I also thought that it would be nice that everybody comes into the conversation through their own perspectives of who they are, rather than I read a very formal briefing of who they are on paper. I'm looking straight ahead of you, I'm sorry. Then you become the first. I just want to, because I will correctly say your name. Eva or Eva?
Ewe.
Eva, yeah. Okay. Then I will, I beg my pardon if I say Eva.
Yeah, it's fine.
But I will try my best to say Eva. Eva, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. So I'm Ewe Benbenek. I'm a writer. I haven't been like a writer in the field of literature that long. It's been around 2 years. And before that, I worked in German academia at the German department here at the University of Hamburg. Yes, and my work, the academic work, but also now the literature work, focuses around discourses around classism, post-migrant discourses, with the special, lately also with a special focus on post-socialist contexts.
Mikael, would you like to take number 2?
Yeah. My name is Michael. I'm actually academically trained as a philosopher. I finished my studies in philosophy in 2005, so long time ago actually. And since about 2006, I would say, I work as a performer or dancer, and since 2012, I mainly work as a choreographer on the field of contemporary choreography. Yes.
Thank you.
That's a good one.
You want to add more? You're welcome.
No, it's okay.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thomas, would you like to take the last leg of the bios?
I am Thomas Prestø. I am the founder and artistic director of Tabanka, African and Caribbean People's Dance Ensemble, Northern Europe's only predominantly Africana dance company. I'm also a doctorate fellow doing a decolonial performance doctorate, and I lecture in the fields of critical race theory, decoloniality, anti-discriminatory practice, etc., especially as it tangents the field of art.
Thank you. And my name is Duduzile Mathonsi. I am a linguist and a performing artist and a former journalist. Without any further ado, I do want to break the ice a bit. And we talked a little bit earlier on, and as I was writing to the three of you, at first I wanted to say, hey guys, this is this and this and this, and just to give you information. And then I realized, in the context of us also talking about the power of language, is hey guys, within an English context, still appropriate to even say to people? So I was just like, what is the new, sure guys, hey guys, something as normal as an everyday interaction that we take for granted. And I was also just curious, does anybody know that, I know it's off topic, but does anybody know if there's like a gender neutral version of that? Hey y'all? I like that one. Anybody else know a hey y'all or any, hey folks? Is there German equivalent?
Leute. Hey Leute.
And what is the direct translation for that?
People.
Hey people.
Yeah.
Ah, in my language, it's just hello they, because we have no gender pronouns. So they will come into elders and as well as everyone. So it's very interesting to finally, I hadn't thought of it, so it was really interesting, like it happened today, so it's real time type of situation. But okay, now let me get serious. So my first question to everyone, because we're talking about intersectionality and the 3 days is about intersectionality, I wanted to ask you individually, what does intersectionality mean to you? Mikael, would you like to take the first one?
Yeah, honestly, it's a big question, of course, but to put it a little bit analytically, I would say that for me, intersectionality means basically that we are all permeated by a variety of power relations. So we are, as individuals, as a condensation, a crystallization of a variety of social power relations, economic power relations, racist power relations, patriarchal power relations, and we are all kind of situated within this variety of power relations. And we also take different positions within these power relations. So as a white body, which is also red, as a male body, I'm of course occupying a dominant position within these power relations, and on the other hand, as a disabled person, I'm occupying let's say, dominated position within ableist power relations, and for me, intersectionality has something to do with the fact that those power relations don't only exist one beside the other, but they are in a complex manner articulated, like combined with each other. So that's for me basically intersectionality.
That's a very interesting arrival to it, and it made me think of, do you think, like the meeting points of that, because now I'm thinking about like an intersection, like if you're driving, right, and you come to an intersection, and all these different parallel power structures meet in that middle part of the intersection, and what is that, and that negotiation to be able to cross to the other side. I just had that picture in my head when you said that, yeah. But it's very interesting. And what about for you, Eva?
Yeah, I can only add, I mean, Michael said already a lot of things. I mean, I asked, so first of all, for me, when I came across that term, it was a theoretical term, right? And I always, and when I came across this, I would say it was and is a tool, right? An analytical tool, how we can analyze structures, institutions, communities, especially those that have hegemonic power, right? So it's a tool how to analyze systems and have a, it's a tool that makes it possible for us to look at these structures in a critical way. This is what I would say intersectionality is as an analytical tool. And while you were talking, I was also starting to think, and also before coming here, I thought, well, the best thing, or maybe it's a utopia, is that intersectionality can be a practice, right? And in the best case, a practice of solidarity, meaning when we use these tools as also gaining knowledge about different sections of discrimination, we can learn. And we can also practice being aware of what kind of discriminations are there, and although we might be affected by it individually, by some sections, how can we be in solidarity with other forms of discriminations that we are not affected by? So in the best case, it would also be like practice of solidarity.
What you said made me think of, like, if you talk about the tools and the practice of it, and then my thought process was, can those tools also be practical tools? Because there is the solidarity point, solidarity view in solidarity with, but it comes in, I think this is also in connection with tomorrow's topic of allyship, right? Where, like, how can we, like, are the tools practical enough that we can use them on a daily basis to actually instigate for change? It was just something that just came up when you were giving me your answer. Thomas, hello from the other side.
Yes, well, for me, because I lecture on it, of course, it becomes quite specific, but I also feel like being specific, and also to do proper citation. Kimberly Crenshaw is the origin and originator of intersectionality. She was an Africana-American woman. And that is a very important context to bring in. Because the same way that a lot of artists have a tendency to appropriate Edouard Glisson's concept of the right to opacity, for example, and makes it kind of become the right to be mysterious, we have a tendency to try to make intersectionality universal. And there's, of course, merit to that, because it's, as so many other theories that comes out of that community, it can serve anyone who's marginalized or underprivileged. But in doing so, one also erases the work that was done. So intersectionality was really the understanding of both what is called dimensional discrimination and cumulative discrimination. So it's not an additive practice. A lot of people have a tendency to explain intersectionality as if it is being discriminated for being both gay and black, as if the two just multiply. But when you understand what cumulative discrimination is, that is also understanding that you, as a black woman, come from parents who were discriminated and have siblings who are discriminated. And that situates you in the world, and it describes your power. So it's also a very clever way for her to include the multi-generational discrimination and situational discrimination that faces specifically the black woman, but also black people, into the realm of law. And why am I saying it like that? It's because we actually have a lot less protection in almost all countries in the world than other discrimination topics. And it's not one shouldn't compare in some ways, but legally you can. In most countries, racism is legal. It is only, it only gives you a harder punishment if other illegalities happen at the same time. So if you punch me and say, you damn Negro, it is the punch that is illegal. And then if the motivation was racism and I can prove that it is so, you might get a harder punishment. There's very few countries in the world where the law goes further than that. So racism is not something that you are usually actually protected from at all. She managed to find a way to include experiences of generational racism into the realm of law. And that was really the genius behind intersectionality.
And I think you've already come into my first kind of question in terms of like the influence of language and how language can influence how we see things, but also influence how we move, how things are done, how structures are implemented. And I wanted to reel it in terms of art and asking, in all of your opinions, does the power of language, do you think, influence how we make art? Because I think for me, sometimes there are times where I make the work, but then I think, okay, should I make it in English? But then in English, I'm also lost in translation myself because I'm not English, I'm Tsonga. And then like, will I fully express myself? And also if I do it in Tsonga, will I have doors open for me? Because not everybody will understand. Is everybody interested in not listening to that? And also, how do I give my description of my performance? And can I fully give it in the way that it's understood? A lot of the times my performance is translated, and I don't always know how far it's lost in translation and so whatnot. So for me, I wanted to ask, like, does the power of language for you think, influence how we make art and how the viewer can look at it? Or can, I don't know, can art be like something that's transcendent in a way that language does not matter? It's just that, can we even reach that point where we can be present in an art piece and language doesn't filter how we see it, or how we experience art, or how we even create it?
I many times feel the inclination to do work without language, actually, but it's always, I'm always thinking, will people appreciate these kind of purely non-verbal gesture. I, as a disabled performer and choreographer, I always feel a certain ambivalence about language. On the one hand, language in my work always, I can play that card. I can play this card of mashing up theory and autobiographical material via language. So it's a card that I can play. And sometimes I like playing it because it's fun. But sometimes I also feel like, okay, actually I don't feel like talking. I feel like moving. But then I'm the next second thinking to myself, will people really get it? Will they appreciate from my side this purely, let's say, this gesture which is not accompanied by any verbal communication. You know what I mean?
I do. And I sometimes ask myself the same questions in the practice of the work, because language can also be very overshadowing at times. And but at times, as a Black performer, language can also be the voice that I don't have in everyday society. So it's this duality as well. And it can also be a form. It can, I mean, it's equally, as a Black person, it's equally a suppression, but sometimes it's also equally something that can give me the strength to rise up and to give those certain, to address those certain conversations. Thomas, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think I'll be difficult today, in a sense that we really have to also analyze what do we mean with language, in a sense, because language itself is also colonial in many ways. It's epistemic. So a white body that chooses not to speak is still protected by language. The very practice that they do has been verbalized and has been written. Critics will write about it from the context of the performer. The stage is accommodated to the context of the performer. Even a concept of art. What is art? How come most of the African artifacts that are in museums are not considered art? And how come if you go to Africa or the Caribbean, we are supposedly doing craft and not art? So even what is the concept of art? That dance between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock with a quiet sitting audience is a completely observed context in my tradition, for example. And why is it more art if I choose to do that than if I'm doing a voodoo ceremony where the very gods joined me to dance, if I choose not to adopt Western skepticism? So it's also this idea of what is art and who defines what art is. And we know the answer to that. We know who defines what art is. And we know how that the power of this definition was given. That power of definition of what art is an extremely violent practice. It is a genocidal practice. And we have to also acknowledge that if we're really going to have these discussions. And a lot of people are going, oh, but can't it just be apolitical? Well, yes, lovely, let it be apolitical, but then let people stop dying. And that is the brutality of it, because people are even dying for the concept of art. And this whole, now we are returning, aren't we great people, with the museums that are returning artifacts that they have taken. It's just, again, look at how was that taken. And are those practices, can you find Benin golden masks today? No. Why are there nobody producing those today? Because they were all killed off. So it's just to give a little bit of a perspective and also the context. I am initiated. When I dance, boys become men. They can marry, they can move out. Until I dance, whether they be 37 or 55, they are still boys. Why is it considered more powerful or more high art if I'm standing on a national opera stage than if I'm doing that process of actually transforming who people are in the eyes of the universe? So those are just questions that I want to fling out there, because these are also questions of language. And if you perform in Shwana, is it art? Would it be art here? Who defines whether that is art or if you're just doing folk, for example? So that's interesting. If we're really going to talk about language and talk about art, then we have to talk about that, or even whose body language. The polyrhythms that I warm up to, not a single Western notation system is capable of writing down the polyrhythms that I warm up to. Laban notation and other concepts of writing how my body is moving polycentrically to those rhythms also do not exist. So if we're going to talk about language, we also need to acknowledge that Western languages has lost me already at the warm-up. And then we can start to talk, what is the role of the critic if he can't even follow my warm-up?
And I think you're going into very present conversation, which is we're looking at the gays and also the gatekeepers where the critics fall into. But I want to pause that one, and so we can unravel that in the next round, and give Eva a chance before we go back into what you're saying, Thomas.
I mean, I find it interesting because just before the panel started, Michael and me were like also asking ourselves, or you said, oh, we're sitting here at a panel concerning language, and then the question is what that is. And I think it's just like Thomas has pointed out, like the question is, what is it? Is it about the languages of nationalities or different languages we use? That in itself can be an exclusion, or is it a practice? Is it like a practice of forming power structures? Yeah, do we look at language that way? Or we were also saying like about which language will we talk? Dance as language, right? And so I guess thank you for like pointing it out. So how, do we go about this concept of language, or what do we define, or how do we define it, or how broad do we see it here today? And then I mentioned also, yes, I'm the one on the panel who mainly works with language, right? Like as a writer, my main material is language, usually like German language mixed with Polish and English, and yes, and the question for me is also, or in my practice, for me it's about using this material that German language is and trying to ask myself, what is it actually, and how can it be stressed, and how much, or how can it be transformed, or which practices of speaking German are actually excluded from a discussion about high art and German. Yeah, so are ways of writing German included that are affected by classism? This is my main question. So yeah, just to point out like how broad the topic is. Yeah, all these dimensions when you mention the term language in itself. What kind of material is it actually? Do we really talk about the words, or do we talk about a practice? I think that's also important to think about.
I think language is like a never-ending pool of possibilities, and also conversation. And when you think about even, like, we can talk about arts language, we can talk about everyday language, we can talk about colonial language, but we can also talk about the fact that we're speaking English, and the differences of how I'm arriving to English and how you're arriving to English, right? We can also speak to the form of how you get into a country and you don't speak the language and somebody repeats the same thing in their language as if you're gonna hear it differently. But I think language is like, it's an interesting box in terms of like gatekeeping coming into what Thomas was saying. And I feel like because it's a colonial tool, a lot of our languages have been erased and also not given an opportunity to grow, which means no funding for it. And when we also look at, what's this, the new, like the, what's this word spelling thing? My words are gone. Like no, the Roman, the font, not the font, the thing we're typing.
Alphabet?
Yes, the alphabet. So even when we look at the alphabet, a lot of African languages are using the Western alphabet, except for certain countries who still maintain that. And it is a form of control, and it is also how you are looking at language, which also gets into the gaze. So Thomas, can you pick up from that as we continue with looking into whose gaze?
Where do you want me?
Whose
Do you want me
gaze?
to? Mm-hmm.
Shall we try again? Okay,
From
so who's? Okay, talk, Thomas. I'll wait. It's okay. The floor is yours.
I blame the line. I'm raised too well to cut off a black woman. So just speak, and I'm enjoying the distance. That means you cannot throw a mic and you cannot throw punches. So please just speak.
Okay, so in your opinion, whose gaze is represented in language? And because we're speaking English, which is kind of a universal language, but also a very violent colonial language, do you think we'll ever get to a point, I know this is also a broad question, where we can have a collective language or a universal language that we can agree that this is the language we're using? Because I know in certain spaces around Europe, people refuse to speak English, and then you're just like, then what must happen? Because this is the language that has been informally presented as the universal language. So I wanted to...
Look at you calling out the French.
And the Germans. I've been here a week, and they're not very giving in terms of language. And I won't lie, yes, people have... What sabotage is this? You disappeared there for a minute. Hello?
I am here. I will not be disappeared.
Okay,
so gaze. No, well, the thing is, for example, I'm doing a doctorate now, and I've decided to colonize in reverse. So I've decided to force the English language to do what I wanted to do, and I've created a lot of new terminology in order to capture some of the concepts that I've mentioned. And it's also because I realized very quickly that there's a violence in trying to take African concepts and words and then giving it an English definition. Because once you try to say this word, cesele lame, for example, means the sensation that lives in the body. But the thing is that if you look at the actual African word, even just a slight change in tone of the pronunciation of the word changes the concept of it. So that one word is paragraphs or pages of meaning. And that is also one thing with tonal languages and several things like that, to really understand how deep they are conceptually and how also well conceptualized art is in the African context. So for example, if I should try to explain how come, and now I'm simplifying it, even what I'm doing now is violent. If I'm saying how come singing, acting, dancing, and drumming are not necessarily considered different aspects in some African contexts, well, those contexts will usually define that as human vibration, because the voice vibrates, your body moves and or vibrates, and the drummer dances the drum like the dancer dances the floor, etc. So those are really aspects of a similar act, depending on how you are looking at it prospectively. So then to understand that, but then also understand that it's super nuanced, and I can go on for hours about that, or even write another doctorate about it. But it just shows how hard it is to capture actually through the limited English language. Because the English language and even the French language and so on, when it comes to conceptualizing art, is actually an infant. And that is also something that colonialism does not allow us to even talk about. that there are other traditions in the world that have had concepts of art for longer than we have had civilization in those languages. Yet we try to make those languages the barbarian and say that that language is poor because we don't understand it. It's kind of the same as human thinks that the animals that are the most intelligent are the animals that can understand human language, while we don't understand anything any animal says. So what does that say about us if they would use the same meter to define our intelligence? So and this is just an example of what gaze does to us. This concept of, because gaze very often evaluates through likeness. So the more like me you are, the better is the quality of what you're doing, is usually what the gaze does. And the more understandable you are to me, the better what you do must be. If I don't understand it, it must be bad. That is what the gaze really does. The woman is less than the man because the woman is not like the man. And if the man cannot understand the woman, then something must be wrong with the woman. That's the male gaze. And then he would prefer her then to just be naked, because then he does not need to understand anything more, because that is enough to keep his interest. That is super simplified, the male gaze. But these gazes happens all the time, and it's really dumbifying. So, but the problem is, or to finish, I don't think we will reach where you say, because so much damage has been done, that the plurality of the world has already been damaged beyond recovery. So we are looking at a radical rebuilding or a radical creation of something that has not existed, because we have literally burnt down the house.
And I asked this question because the festival's name is Soft Utopia. And so it is also the questioning of utopia, and if utopia can ever be in existence, right? Because if you say that we've burnt down everything, we can never get to that, then I would say that the word utopia then becomes redundant in a way. But Eva, I want you to what's happening?
I think you were starting, right?
Will you start? No, I saw that you wanted to jump in, so I thought if there was a thread. But Michael, if you would like to take on. No. You're okay?
Yeah, just because you asked, like, is a common gaze desirable? And just thoughts that came up while Thomas was speaking. Because, Thomas, you pointed out, is it possible at all, right? And you pointed out how from, like, colonialist, imperialist practices, from this kind of language, doesn't matter which, if it was French or German or English, like this practice, when we get it as a language, has already erased a lot of different gazes or a lot of different practices. So I was just thinking, is it desirable, or are we at this point now where we should aim for a common gaze or this utopic thing, or is the utopia rather going into research and unlearning and deepening what has been forgotten? That was just something that came up, and not even in terms of different languages, also within a language, also within an imperialist language as German, right? Like what kind of shades of German have been suppressed, systematically suppressed. This is just something that came up while you were speaking. So this question, is it desirable to have a common gaze, or are we at the point yet, or is it more about rediscovering practices of language?
You want to go into that?
I would like to share a question with you, a question that I actually don't have an answer to, but it came out when I listened to all of you speaking, because I would think to myself, as Thomas pointed out, language can, or translation can erase the otherness or the specific singularity of the other, like language and the gaze and the image and the imaginary in a way kill the other and kill and erase the otherness and the specificity of the other's experience and situatedness. But then I would like to come back to your question of solidarity. Like how can language what's the role of language in practices of solidarity when this language has the potential to erase the otherness of the other, and on the other hand, there needs to be a certain coming together of differently situated and differently positioned singularities. Let's put it like this. And this is what I'm struggling about. Like, how can language create a space?
Thomas is locked out and he's trying to move. What's up, what? Thomas? Okay, you'll be back in a few seconds. I'm sorry. Sorry, guys.
I don't know if we should wait for Thomas.
Yes.
I think
Since time
we're
is
running out of
passing,
time, so
just
I think
like
we can
while
continue.
You were speaking,
yeah.
Because it also, because you you referred to the question, solidarity, like language as a practice of solidarity. And then I was also thinking, how can it be an act of solidarity by understanding singularities, and then it came to my mind that also the absence of speaking is incredibly important as an act of solidarity within the language system. When we think about that certain power structures erase singularities, this is done by like putting something on top of it. I find it interesting, especially when it comes to those ways that are underrepresented or discriminated or lost. Isn't also a step of solidarity listening to them, giving space to them, actually the absence of producing, in a sense, as an act of solidarity, but giving space to it. It just came to my mind while you were speaking, because you said you asked yourself, how is it an act of, how do these singularities come together? How can they come together?
Exactly.
Through language, and it just came to my mind. There also has to be the space of the absence of it in order for one to be able to be heard, right?
But
just brainstorm.
But then many singularities meet and everybody's silent.
Yeah.
That's not the solution.
No.
You know?
And what would you think?
I'm sorry to disturb this, but we're running out of time as well, and we haven't opened it up to the audience. But just to add what you're saying in terms of like the solidarity that happens when you talked about silence, we must also understand that silence, who gets to be silent and gets to be that affordability, because POCs or minorities within Europe silence means you're okay. So there's also that level of who gets offered silence, and what Thomas said about like who's protected by silence,
Yes.
in a way. So, but I do understand that that's the mic passing on the mic type of situation, which is for me a very good way of solidarity and allyship, to be able to give somebody else to speak. And you just taking a step back and saying, okay, you speak, rather than I'm speaking for you, in a way. But I am going to wrap this up and ask quickly. Literally, we have less than 10 minutes. I am so sorry. But are you guys enjoying this? Like, okay, great. It's good to hear. But then I wanted to ask, does anybody have a question? I think I will take 1, 2 short, brief questions, maybe one. And yeah. We have literally 9 minutes. Does anybody have a question? There is crickets going on. What's up? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So I think maybe you guys can continue in terms of like what you were saying in terms of like solidarity. And you were about to say something before I interrupted you. So I think people like to hear us talk.
No, I was just elaborating on that question of how to, because for me, politics has a lot to do with articulation, like articulation in a terminological sense of articulating different positionalities, or articulating different, for example, condensing different demands into one demand, like this tendency towards articulation or towards condensation. For me, it's something that maybe I stay silent. Yeah. What did I say? Yeah, this condensation of demands, which I think is so important in politics and in political practice. And I'm wondering how to think of this condensation without actually difference and otherness being erased. And I was wondering a lot about how to create a language which, on the one hand, captures my own singular experience, while also having the potential to open up or to resonate with other situated experiences. I'm thinking a lot about this issue of resonance. Language as a space where different experiences can resonate with each other without erasing difference, despite this resonance being there. But I don't know.
I think for me, within that, is that it would have to start with the removal of the hierarchies of languages, the acknowledgement of what Thomas said earlier, but also the giving equal importance to other languages and their structures and how they operate. The world right now is ruled by certain languages, and those languages are dominant and are unforgiving to other languages or are not accommodating. Fanagalo is also a good way Fanagalo is basically different languages coming together. Sometimes you would find, like with migrant workers or people working in mines, like in South Africa, and because we have so many languages, so different people would come to work in one place. And so eventually different words and different phrases come in, and now everybody is speaking this weird language that is a mix of everybody, but only these workers know this language because they know that everybody brought in a word and created this thing. So I think Fanagalo is also something that could be looked into how language can move forward, but it's also the acknowledgement of the power that language has and how people use it to discriminate. These are just the acknowledgements of the structures and navigating the world with different languages that are not within the top languages of the world. Maybe that is something that we can throw into the mix of how can we find a language that can help bury it? But I don't know, we'd have to start with racism to begin with and colonial structures that we have to break down. But Eva, before you all be the last wrap up.
I think it was a pretty good last word. I don't want to have the last word actually.
I can have another last word, but I would like to hear your final thoughts on
No,
this.
I mean, it's because you asked after me mentioning silence or giving space as a solidarity practice, you raised the question, but when I understood you right, that we do need to speak up and form languages or form a language, and in sense of spaces where things can resonate. Right, this is how I understood you, and you put in the example of this very concrete example of how different influences in a discriminated place form its own language. So therefore, this resonating space is created through actual practice of language. But again, then the question is just adding to it, what a place to resonate would be for you,
And I think I'm going to have to end it there before the other side.
Can also be an agreement or a manifest or something like that, right? Doesn't have to be like a language, but maybe agreement or something like that. Yeah.
I wish we had more time. 10 more minutes? Can Thomas come back? Because I thought it was over.
Yeah, no, but again, and I like it because we started, or Thomas brought this level in of a space where you use the word condense or articulate an agenda, if you will, through it's not only connected to certain practices of languages, but also the frame of something, right? How are the rules of the space, or is there a manifesto or something like that? Thinking about this dimension of language, not only the singular languages, but also language as a certain kind of framework or set of rules where that have to be anti-racist, that have to erase these kind of hierarchies. So just thank you, I guess, for bringing up also these language as a structure that has to be established or brought down.
I'm going to try to open the floor one more time.
Yeah.
Zama, you're the only hand up. We can hear you, I'm sure, if you just use your voice.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much. This is amazing. I'm not sure if anyone's first language is English in this room. I kind of doubt it. So, in speaking to creating a more resonant space within language and the languages that we have to our disposal, just like you said, in a lot of African languages, there is no gender,
I just want to repeat the gif of what you said to Thomas. There's an audience member who's asking, can people use other languages, or are you curious about other languages and how they influence your practice? Is that the gif of it? And I just want to say that we'd also have to start from appropriation, like we'd have to have a conversation about the capitalistic way of appropriating language, and also because some of our languages are already underfunded or are not growing and whatnot. And so I think that also for me could potentially speak into the gain of appropriation within others' languages. I think in the long run it would be a great utopia to arrive to, but as of now, I think it can get a bit like mushy in its attempt. But does anybody want to speak to that? Thomas, because you've, oh Jesus. Does anybody want to, are you still there?
I'm here, am I being heard?
Yes, you're being heard.
Okay. It's several things. Like in some contexts, several of us are raised multilingual, and I mean multilingual as opposed to translation. Because you reach a certain point in your life, and when you go into the kind of systemized way of learning a language, you learn by substitution, which is where you hit into the problems. So you're taught that this English word is the equivalent of this German word, which is the equivalent of this French word. But if you come to languages like we've spoken of before that are far enough removed from that common root, because those languages are actually quite common to each other, you will hit on a real problem of substitution. So the question is also, when can you truly learn another language, and when are you substituting? And what does that substitution do? Because if we're into the realm of philosophy, language carries episteme, carries ontology, carries philosophy. Are we truly able to grasp the philosophy of another language at a certain point? And a lot of people don't like us to say those things, just like we say, oh, nobody can own culture, which to me is the most laughable thing Western culture says. Because Western culture regulates all parts of culture. That's why everything can be copyrighted. What is intellectual property if it's not the ownership of culture? So if a white artist does something, it is their intellectual property. If an African artist does the same, it is culture and cannot be owned, therefore it can be arrogated. There's something really weird about how we're practicing really differently according to who is the producer and who is the sender. And some of the things we dare to say, the same as we say that, oh, but it's common, art always grows through appropriation. Says who? I know a lot of art forms and dance forms that did not grow out of appropriating other cultures. It grew out from study of self. So there's certain truth that is repeated so many times that they become true. And I know I'm raising a lot of problems and issues, and I'm not a negative person because I come from a carnival nation. I just want to say that as well. It's just that I want to raise those things that we never talk about, because we like to make the touch easy. Like they said, soft utopia. I believe that utopia can be reached. I just do not believe it will be soft. Because the history that brought us to where we are now was not soft. No. And to whom is it soft? In whose interest is that softness? Usually the interest of that softness is in the perpetuator. It's in the victimizer. Because one fears retaliation and one doesn't really want to pay the bill. So then we say, oh, let's just start with clean slates, because then we can move forward. Forward for whom? For example, if we can ask that question again, who is evolving and who is stagnating? Who is learning a language and who is losing a language? Those are also the questions. And is it desirable in a sense? But I do believe that we should be, of course, extremely interested in language, because we should be extremely interested in communication, and we should be extremely interested in other people. And Maya Angelou quoted a Latin saying, which is, I am human, therefore nothing human can be alien to me. So there's definitely the possibility and ability to understand each other. The question is, do we have to understand each other through likeness, or can we understand each other through difference, aka polyrhythm?
That's very interesting when you say this. It made me think of, I speak 11 languages, and that usually is met with a shock, a digestion, and then a really. And then it's always met with, are they related? Which also goes into like, yes, but Germanic languages are related. But nobody's talking about the fact that Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian is one language, it's just different dialects. The same with Germanic languages. When you have Dutch, you have German, you have Afrikaans. And English, which is kind of like present in all of them. So it just made me think of that, and also of like who somehow determines whether your ability to speak those languages is validated or not. In a way, and demanding that you add another language to meet them. Well, most people speak 1 or 2 languages, and it's basically not humanly possible to speak more than 5 languages, or the average person, but that's not true. I mean, languages are versatile, and it also makes me think of when you say, like, do you give up a piece of yourself when you speak another language, or do you sacrifice your language a little bit less? And I would say to a certain degree there is a bit of a sacrifice that you need to give to learn another language, or not a sacrifice, but there needs to be something shifts in your own language when you adopt another language, when you learn another language, and maybe this is the beginning of the answer of your question, of like, is it possible to the solidarity of language, or is it possible for language to somehow be common? Or the question that I asked in terms of like, can we get to the utopia of language? Maybe that's the beginning, like be willing to lose something within your own language, because in learning the other, then we're able to, not coming to like, I am fully in this language, but then the meeting point should be, I'm willing to lose something to learn another language. But I know now that has to be the final, what is it, final? 10 more minutes? What rabbit hats do you guys think I am? But Michael, you wanted to say something. Please.
No, I was again curious, and again a question popped up in my mind, like, what does it actually, what would it mean to identify, what would it mean to understand a different language without the process of substitution? Like, what would it mean for me to understand a different language without me operating on the level of substitution? I have no idea. I mean, I'm really curious. What would it mean? Would it mean to get into the language game of the other? Like, would it be a practical immersion into the Wittgensteinian language game of the other? Or what would it mean to understand the other language without operating on the level of substitution, without me being wholly language raised? I have no idea.
Eva, do you think you want to take that?
Wow, yeah. What would it mean to use or to get into another language without substitution, without logical substitution? I have to think about it. I can't react on it now.
That's okay.
I need a minute.
Take a minute.
I mean, it's...
Thomas, you look like you're ready.
No. I find the question is interesting, and I also find the fact that it is a question interesting.
Yeah.
But like you mentioned, for some of us, it is what is natural to us, and we are trained and we're used to what some would call code switch, but actually completely change mindset in order to go into one language or another. Yeah. So there's some languages that I speak that when I speak them, I wouldn't even, my mind wouldn't go through translation. No. But for example, I noticed that if I'm going to translate Spanish to Norwegian, I would go through English, because I went to the American School of Barcelona as I was learning Spanish, and the way they teach it to you, I was learning Spanish in English. Therefore, there's always this level of translation as you're doing it, while certain other languages I speak, there's certain actions that I would be doing where I would never think to, or since you're Bantu, and we both have then Bantu heritage, although 500 years removed, if I say that the Zoom situation that happened was, you would understand what I mean, Dudu.
I would.
But if I'm trying to translate that to English, I would probably be talking an entire paragraph.
True.
For example, because the semiology of it can't translate. Yeah. So all you do is circle it enough times to try to narrow it down conceptually. Yeah. But there is no translation.
Yeah. But this makes this is very interesting, because I think when language was removed from us and we had minimal language left to communicate, right, and the forced underdevelopment of our languages, it also forced us to use the words that we had in multifacetedness, I would think. I don't know if this is pure fact that's documented, because also we don't have a lot of our facts or histories documented, but I would think that it is maybe a result of the languages not being able to develop, that we use the words that we had for different things, right? Just like ish, which would mean like ish, ish, ish. And those are three different words, but because of tonality, it gives different things, right? But I want to speak a little bit...
That's not necessarily reduction, because a lot of the original languages were tonal. But because you're in school, you're forced to learn in a colonial language, the concepts are, or let's say Dudumba, because that's something people can look up. So Dudumba is a Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Senegal-based dance, the dance of the strong men. But if you say Dudumba, it is both the rhythm, it is the place, it is the context, it is the social thing. So that one sounding is an entire context. So when you speak of it, you're speaking a context, you're not speaking a singular thing. So even this thinking of plural, this polycentric thinking, even creates a language which is different, or just the implication of what you said before. Your language is non-gendered. What does that do to the concept of personhood? How do you try to explain it? Because it's not the same as being non-binary.
No, it's
and so
not.
On, because that is something that you have gone from being gendered, and then you're trying to resist gendering. Therefore, you are creating this new concept that you are applying by force, which is completely different than gender not being part of the aspects of personhood, which is similar if you look at our gods. The gods are also non-gendered very often, or dual or plural gendered. For example, doesn't really apply to he or she. What does that do with your worldview, with your cosmology? So the concept of Serena Williams being masculine because she's powerful couldn't exist in a universe where power is not gendered. Serena Williams is Serena Williams, the most powerful athlete in the world, period. What does gender have to do with it in the original context of what is her heritage as well, to some degree?
Has your minute come in? Thank you, Thomas, for that. I was asking Eva if she's, have you found your minute, or are you okay with that? Sorry, I'm playing with words. Have you found your minute? This is a good example, because what I've done is directly translated from my language, and then sometimes it gets lost in English, and then it's just bad grammar or something like that. But
I don't know. I guess I was listening, learning what you said. No, I was, but yeah, it's not fully there. But I was asking myself, so as somebody who speaks or is firm in the oppressor's languages like French, German, English, and then Polish, which it's a different case because its history has another history of, it's not that entangled in the history of colonization and the other three. Like, I guess I was just wondering what would it mean to, or would it be possible for somebody socialized in these power languages to even, I mean, what kind of tools would it need to even get close to an understanding of those concepts that you mentioned, you know, as they are not, as I, if you will, have been socialized in all these, in itself, simplified colonialist languages, because that could also be a theory. Isn't the colonialist languages or the oppressors' languages already a simplification, you know? Yeah. Just thoughts.
I think there's also speaking to coding and like in the investigation of my piece, the first leg of my investigation was investigating how people navigate. Like Scandinavians for me it was a very interesting observation in terms of like this, I don't have the words for it, but I call it like this linearity, the straightness versus the curves and the never-ending infinity circles that is within Africanism and how we move and how we speak. And this for me, I put it into coding as well, because when I speak English, I'm in that linearity in a way, because English is here, right? All colonial languages are here, because Norwegian as well is up here. But when I'm speaking African, and then to an extent, so I use my whole body in the way that I speak when I speak my home language. But it's very interesting in terms of that, also coming back to what you're saying, like, where is it in your body when you speak? This languages that you find, can we actually, or that we speak, like, can you investigate where it is, and like, can that also be a tool? I don't know, like, it's just these, like, yeah, where is it? Like, because I know we speak with the belly, and the West speaks with the chest, which is also something else of like where the voice is coming from. And somebody said to me, could it also be that Western civilization, women as well was corsets, so they were really like tightened up and armor wear, and maybe we didn't have so much, I don't know. Thomas?
No, but yeah, you're into something, because even speaking what we're speaking now, like you're saying, on Fridays, my throat is destroyed from whitening my body the whole week. This is not my voice. This is my voice. But if I speak like this, it sounds angry to the Western ear, and I project too much power. So if I would go into the board meeting and speak like this, everyone smalls up themselves to speak Caribbean. So in order to give other people the space, because the vibration of my body is too much, I'm doing what I'm doing now. So I'm bringing the voice up into here, and I'm also not allowing it to vibrate too far out of my body. And I'm condensing it, and I'm policing it. Also, you have almost not seen me gesticulate or have a body language. I'm a dancer and a choreographer. My body language is larger than what is normal. But because of my position within European society, I have to constantly make my body language small in every single room I go into, especially because I'm an artistic director. You should think that that would free me. But it becomes so much to these other people who cannot deal with the fact that you are a lot or you are different by their standards. And the dancers do the same. So one of the hardest things for my company is that we try to choreograph from an unpoliced black body, which, by the way, is an impossibility because the black body has been policed for 500 years. There's a reason why Angela Bassett and Viola Davis, when they win their prizes, their number one message has been, stop taming us. People believe that they are being larger than life, and their message is stop taming us. They have never been able to be themselves. I've never seen my mother on screen. Angela Bassett playing Tina Turner on screen has a weaker body language than my mother does in her kitchen. So there's something about realizing that most of everyone there, you have never seen a fully fledged Black human on screen or on stage. You have seen some mirage, some edible, acceptable version of, and that's what we need to acknowledge, that we haven't even reached to where that full potential can be released outside of very small bubbles of safe spaces. We're even there to warm it up to the point where we really get to let loose. Almost never happens. So we're in a very interesting part of the conversation. And also this, like I mentioned, polycentricity, because if you take two magnets and something goes around it, it will circulate. So the polycentric movement of African dance is because there's multiple body parts having influence at the same time, versus saying the spine is the king, and as the king, he should rule it all, and therefore the movement has to be this way. So this chronological lineality, this one line, this also has to do with this thinking of the one God, the one king, the one. It reflects into the art as well. It's a philosophy.
And I want to start wrapping it up there. And I want to know if there's any last sentence, one sentence that we can leave to the audience in terms of just language. It doesn't have to be the power of language, but what is language to you? Just one sentence shooting off the bat. Let's start with you, Michael. What is language to you? Like, it can be, I can start. Language to me is frustrating. We can also hand you a minute. And I can pass on to one of you guys, if you guys have something in your head already.
I mean, especially after what we talked about today, I would say right now language is a very complex issue. Yeah.
You need another minute?
I think for me, language is always already a translation of that which cannot be translated.
All right.
Yes, 100%. And Thomas?
Language to me is the process of becoming.
On that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and my apologies again, and the team's apologies to our little bit of inconsistency. Our apologies, Thomas. But thank you very much for taking your time to be with us and to listen to us talk about language. I know as a linguist, like, it can be very boring for people to listen to language talk, and I hope we didn't bore you to run out the door. But I hope you can also take the question of what is language to you, and how do you implement language in your everyday, and how can you also be aware of how language can play power structures in how you move every day. I would like you guys to give Thomas, Eva, and Michael thank you. Hand of applause. There's a South African in the crowd. But thank you very much, guys, and thank you for taking your time out as well and from performers, and taking your time to come and see us, and Thomas for being patient with the Zoom. Everybody else, good night and enjoy the next performance, and see you tomorrow as we talk about performative allyship.